The next process in preparing the samples for examination is grinding and polishing the samples using the semi-automatic grinding polishing tool. We're going to be grinding and polishing 3 samples that we prepared. The first one is known as S1. The next one is S2. And the last one is S3. I'm just going to go ahead and get the machine ready to grind these samples for the first stage of the process. Before we actually grind the samples, I just want to show you what we generally use for grinding the samples. This is 180 grit adhesive paper. This is 320 grit. And this is 600 grit. We apply each 3 of these at different stages of the process. We're going to start with the 180 grit paper. So we're just going to go ahead and grab this. And we're going to apply it to this plate. It is fairly easy to apply the adhesive paper to the composite plate. You just rip this off and apply the paper to the plate so that way there's a little bit of a lip sticking out over the edge for easy removal. We're just going to go ahead and press the jog button and have a water cycle going for 10 seconds. Then you just generally wait a bit for most of the water to spin off. We're now going to lower this down and put the 3 samples into the mounting chamber. This specific chamber is of a single centrally driven drive. If we were to have more than 3 samples, we would be using this mounting chamber, which is still centrally driven, but it has this wedge that holds the mounts in place. But if you were to do that, you would have to reconfigure the entire machine, reprogram it, just so that way it would work for this process. We are now going to start the grinding cycle by pressing the start button. As you can tell, water is the main source of the coolant for the grinding process. This process generally takes 2 minutes. Now that this cycle has ended, we're going to go ahead and lift this up, remove the samples. This is how the sample turned out, by the way. And we're just going to remove this adhesive paper and dispose of it. We're now going to begin with the 300 grit cycle. We're just basically going to repeat the same procedure that we did for the 180 grit paper cycle. Still making sure that there is a lip on the edge for easy removal. And we're still going to rinse this off with water using the jog. And rinse cycle of 10 seconds. We're going to go ahead and lower this down again. Place the samples in the mounting chamber. And repeat step 1 in the program. As before, this process takes 2 minutes. We're going to be repeating the same process for the 600 grit paper. Here's how this sample turned out. As before, we're going to remove this adhesive paper and dispose of it. This is the 600 grit paper. It is a key to note that we don't change the program for the free grinding processes. We have completed all 3 steps of the grinding process. This is what the sample looks like after the 3rd stage of the grinding process. We're gonna go ahead and dispose of this paper. And we're also going to remove this plate. There is a reason for this plate to be removed. It's not magnetic. The polishing plates require a plate that is magnetic. I will show you what the polishing plates look like. These are the polishing plates we're going to use. The first one is the gold label mat. The second one is the dime mat. And this is the spec cloth. Notice that it has steel backing to this cloth. Therefore, we're going to need a special plate called a contra plate for these 3 polishing plates. As you can see, the contra plate is magnetic. But if we try to place the polishing plates on the composite plate, you can notice that it's not magnetic at all. The only reason this is holding on is because there's still water on this plate and it's affecting the grip on the spec cloth. Therefore, we're gonna go ahead and swap the composite plate with the contra plate. The first process we're going to do is the gold label mat. We're just going to go ahead and turn the water off because water is not to be used during this stage of the polishing process. We are going to go ahead and go to step 2. We're going to move this over because this mat has to be coated with an even layer of green lube and 6 micron polishing fluid. The way we're going to apply the fluid is through this automatic fluid dispenser. We're just going to set this up and get the initial polishing cycle started. The first thing we are going to do is place this under a jog cycle and manually start the fluid dispenser. And even coating of fluid has to cover the entire mat, which requires a time of 3 minutes. This nozzle has to be moved to distribute the fluid more evenly. Now that the cycle is ended, we're going to lower this down, place the samples into position, and we're going to start this polishing cycle. This particular cycle takes 2 minutes. Now that the first polishing cycle has ended, we're going to take the samples out and we're going to quickly rinse this plate out with water. We place them out on the countertop with a paper towel underneath the mats to dry. Now we're going to use the dye mat. Place it on like we did the gold label mat. And this time we're going to use 1 micron polishing fluid. We're going to coat this mat like we did the gold label mat. It still uses green lube, but instead of putting the 6 micron on, we're putting 1 micron polishing fluid on. It's still a cycle of 3 minutes. Now that this is evenly coated, we're going to get this into position. Place the 3 samples in the mounting chamber. And under step 3, we're going to begin the next polishing cycle. This cycle, instead of taking 2 minutes, is going to take 2.5 minutes. Now that this polishing cycle has ended, we're going to remove the samples. Here's how the sample is turning out. And we're going to quickly rinse this off like we did with the green lube mat. And we're going to let it dry overnight like we're doing with the gold label mat. Before we place the spec cloth into position, we're going to move this out of the way because we don't need it for this process. We're going to be using 0.05 micron alumina polishing compound with a solution of distilled water. Here is the spec cloth. We're going to place it into position. It's important to leave a lip on the side of a plate below it as to allow easy removal. We're going to rinse this off with water for 10 seconds. We're going to let the water spin off. Now for this process, we're not supposed to have the water flowing onto the spec cloth. So we're just going to move the nozzle, lower the mounting chamber down, place the samples into position, and we're going to change the setting to step 4, and we're going to begin the last polishing cycle. We're just going to add a decent amount of polishing compound onto the plate once every 45 seconds. That was the last polishing process. Here's how the sample turned out. As you can see, you can relatively see no streak lines, and it is a fairly smooth surface. We're just going to set these samples to the side, and we're going to rinse this off before we take it off the contraplate. We're going to go ahead and set this on the countertop under a paper towel to dry overnight. We're now going to place the samples in the next process is to place the samples in an ultrasonic cleanser. We're going to use these tongs to place the samples inside the beakers. These beakers contain distilled water and a special washing fluid that is used to cleanse the samples as to not corrode the samples. We're going to set this for 5 minutes. During this process, the automatic polisher is going to be cleaned. We're now going to take out this mounting chamber, rinse it off, and place it onto the countertop to dry overnight. We're going to do the same with this contraplate. We're just going to leave this machine be as is for the next group that goes to use this machine. Now that the ultrasonic cleansing process has ended, we're going to go ahead and take the samples out. It is very important that you don't touch the sample itself with these tongs, because it could scratch and damage the samples. We're going to go ahead and put the samples onto this tray. It is important that the water dries off of these samples fast, so that way it does not corrode. We're going to try and make sure that the samples are over the holes as to preserve the samples. This is a storage chamber known as the desiccator. As you can see, there is a solid known as desiccant in these trays. It helps dehydrate the water that is on these samples. We're going to place the tray in, securely close this door, and wait for a given period of time to dry the samples. This is the conclusion of the polishing process.